Okay, so let us start. We're on Daf Lamed Hey Amud Aleph, and we've been talking about the Beit HaParva, which is the kind of office, the room in which the Kohen Gadol was prepared for his avodah on Yom Kippur. And the Gemara asks, "My Parva, what does that word Parva mean?" Amar Rav Yosef, Parva means Amgusha. What does Amgusha mean? Says Rashi, Mechashef echad b'na'a ushmo Parva. A magician built it, and his name was Parva. So, looking over the daf, as you said, there was such fascinating Gemara and Amud Beis, but the very beginning of the daf, this Rashi just like, really? We named the Beit Parva after a magician who built it, but it gets even more complicated than that. We learned that Maseches Midos, according to our Masorah, was written. The Tana of most of the Mishnahs in Maseches Midos was Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Remember, we had the shir when a couple of times at Daf Design and other places too. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, "I've forgotten what this place was used for, what it was," and we said, "How can that be? He's the Tana of Maseches Midos. He was in the Beit Midrash himself." And we said they were trying to work it out from first principles, not just learn. Ties back to what we were doing yesterday, not just to be able to find the facts, but to actually reason out what it was used for. Anyway, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov is the Tana in Maseches Midos, and in Maseches Midos, the Beis HaParva is also talked about. Lishkat HaParva sham hayumolchim marot kodshim. In the Lishka itself, they used to salt the skins for kodshim. Va'al gaga ya Beit HaTvila leKohen Gadol b'Yom HaKippurim. And on the roof of the Beit HaParva was the mikveh for the Kohen Gadol for Yom Kippur. And also from downstairs there was a spiral staircase up to that mikveh place. It was quite magnificent. And the Rav Mibartanura, we're going to be talking about the three most classical Meforshim on the Mishnayos. And they're 200 years apart from each other. We've got the Rav Mibartanura, who's like the Rashi on Mishnayos. And we've talked about the Rav Mibartanura. He was Rov in Italy, in Bartanura, born in Bartanura, was Rov in Italy, eventually comes to Eretz Yisrael, you remember, comes to Yerushalayim, and there's 70 families in Yerushalayim and no money. So little money, there isn't even a Sefer Torah in Yerushalayim. This is 15th century. And he builds the structure of a community in Yerushalayim. The first, in relatively modern times, meaning 15th century, he was the architect of the community of Yerushalayim. Till this day, the Chevra Kaddish in Yerushalayim he established. The first shul in the old city he established. He set up the whole community structure for Yerushalayim for 70 families. He brought his own money. He was a banker in Italy, and he used his own money to fund it because there just wasn't money there. And it all was ready. It's just one of these amazing cases of a trufa before the makkah, where Hashem prepares the solution before the problem. Then you had Gerus Farad, then you had the expulsion from Spain, and a whole lot of important Gedolei Yisrael came to Yerushalayim, and there was already a community for them. He had built it and prepared it. So that's the Rav. The Rav says, Lishkat HaParva, Adam mechashev shishmo Parva bana ota lishka al yedei machshefut. He adds on Rashi. He built it using witchcraft. He used magic to build it. Not only was he a magician, he used magic to build it. This is what I found. And the Radvaz comments about the Rav that he had access to all the Rishonim of the time, and therefore his work is incredibly important. And when he says Kach Matzati, he found that in very old sources. And the Rambam gives another story a little bit more like Tosfos, that there was a man who tunneled under the Beit Midrash and made a hole in the floor so as to watch the Kohen Gadol doing the avodah. He died in the process, and they called this Beit HaParva in his name. But leaving that aside, let's stay with the Rav. And the Rav then explains the whole thing with the Tevilos on Yom Kippur, and he says all of the Tevilos between the changing of the clothes that we've learnt about had to be done in a place that was Kodesh, and the Beit Parva was built in a place that was Kodesh. It was part of the Azorah itself, except for the first Tevilah, which we learnt about, where he was just changing from his weekday clothes into his Yom Tov, in his Big Day Kahuna. That had to be done in Kol, that wasn't done in the Beit HaParva, but everything else, explains the Rav, was done in the Beit HaParva. And then we have the Tosfos Yom Tov. So the Tosfos Yom Tov is Yom Tov Lipan Hela. He's 200 years later. So he's now 17th century. Well, very progressive, also a very progressive kind of thinking person. And he says he doesn't get this. V'ani tameh sheyekaimu bekodesh binyan hanaseh yedei kishuv. That they would keep, if it's true that it was built with magic, that they would even keep that as part of the Beis HaMikdash. How would that be? Never mind, name it after the magician. And so then he brings the Rash with a completely different explanation as to what this Beis HaParva is, different from Rashi, different from everybody. Then we have the Tiferes Yisrael. The Tiferes Yisrael is again 200 years later. So the Tiferes Yisrael is now 19th century, also extremely progressive. The Tiferes Yisrael just opens the Mishnah for us, makes it intelligible, but he's progressive in the sense he has a piece where he describes dinosaurs and he talks about prehistoric animals and he doesn't have a problem with them. And he has a piece where he talks about how non-Jews in some ways are on a higher level than Jews. Don't think that non-Jews are necessarily on such a low spiritual level compared to Jews. That isn't so. Just an interesting person altogether, and as a result of that, he was criticized, of course. He was very controversial. A lot of people didn't like what he's done, but he's found his way into the canon of the main Mefarshim of the Mishnah. It's interesting that the Tosfos Yom Tov also had a very difficult life. When in his 50s, he was reported to the authorities for attacking Christianity in his work, which he doesn't do anywhere. And eventually he was accused of not fulfilling or undermining the Pope's instruction that the Talmud should be burnt. This was later than the first burning, which was in the 13th century. And he was put into jail. He was sentenced to death. He escaped that, and he carried on an important life. The Tosfos Yom Tov was a Talmid of the Maharal Prague and the Klei Yoker, we talked about in yesterday's Matmonim Shir. The Tiferes Yisrael says that about this Beit HaParva, He'elu hamayim lahagag al yedei silonot ma'aseh uman. There was an amazing plumbing system that got the water up to the roof. Ba'ofen shelo yiyu she'uvim. It's not in a way that it's not mayim she'uvim, so it's kosher for a mikveh. But it creates halishka azot al shem ha'adam shebena'abu manut nifla'a ugdola. And this office is called in the name of the architect who did it most brilliantly. La'alot ha'mayim toch ovikot le'ah, to bring the water up through the walls. Ad she'aya nireh ki'ilu bena'ah ve'ele ba'mayim b'chishuf. It looked as if it was magic. It looked magical. The water just came and it appeared. That's what it means. Kach diri lefarish hashas in YOMA. That's how I understand the Gemara here with Amgushi. So that you don't have the kasha of the Tosfos Yom Tov. Miyu afal gav the gam beit hatfila shel gav shar hamayim. He says, but the base hatfila on the shar hamayim that was used for the weekdays was also the water came up to the top. But if shar sham hayunikarim asilonot, you could see the plumbing there. Ma'ashe'enken beparva lo hayunikarin asilonot klal. But with the Beit HaParva, you couldn't see the plumbing at all. It just looked completely magical. It looked as if the water came there just in a wonderful way all on its own. What's important about this, and this is the real Matmon, is to understand the Torah's approach to technology. Here's an example of technology. So there's a magical effect created by technology. So what do we do with it? Do we say, it's just technology? Not only do we keep it, we celebrate it, and we call it Beit HaParva. Because it's so magical. What does magical mean? Magical can mean lots of things. It can mean sleight of hand. That's not what I'm talking about. We think of magic as being something supernatural. That's not what I'm talking about. When we say something's magical, it's also about our response to it. As the Tiferes Yisrael says, when you looked at it, it looked like magic. When you come into a hall or a home that's beautifully decorated with little twinkling lights and flowers and everything, you walk in and go, wow, it's magical. What does that mean? That sense of you're in a wonderland. It doesn't mean it was done supernaturally. Somebody put it all together. There's an explanation for everything. The fact there's an explanation doesn't undermine the magic. And that's how we become stale and old. When you start looking at magical things and just because it's rational, you understand it's technology. It's high tech. No, it's magic. When I stood watching the first night, watching the Iron Dome shooting down rockets, we had a beautiful view from our house. I was so mesmerized. It didn't enter my mind to go into this in my mind. I was so mesmerized by the magic of it. It was magical. Now, of course, I know this technology. Technology doesn't undermine the magic. If you think how little children look at technology, I remember the first time I showed my children a fax. And I showed them, we sent a fax to Eric Kerbel. It was the first fax that we sent. And they looked, and then Eric sent one back, and they said, where did it go? How did it get there? There was the sense of magic. And then we lose it. Then it becomes vachadik. It becomes every day. You see in the Gemara, don't lose the sense of wonder and magic. Be like a child. It doesn't matter that there's a rational explanation for it. That doesn't mean it's less magic. There's a rational explanation for the Bria Sa'ilam. The scientists will figure it out. Hashem did it in a scientific way. Hashem doesn't do things irrationally. There's a scientific way that the world was created. The Kuzari says the creation of a human being, there's a scientific way, and we'll find the formula one day, and we'll be able to create people, the Kuzari says. It doesn't mean that it's not rational because it's magical, but also don't lose the magic. Keep that childlike wonder about things that look magical, that feel magical, and see the magic and feel the magic and the wonder every time you use a computer, every time something works. And it is Nisim as well, whether you're thinking of the Iron Dome or you're thinking about turning the light switch on or opening a faucet, a tap, any of these things, it is. How many Nisim have to take place? What has to be in place to make it all work? How many millions of things have to be in place to enable an aeroplane to fly from Tel Aviv to New York safely? How many people were involved in that? How many decades of history were involved in that? How many things had to be invented and created? How many people had to collaborate? How many people still have to... You just think of it. It's wonder. It's unbelievable. And we mustn't allow the fact that it's rational to destroy the magic. Rationality and magic are not in opposition to one another. They support one another. And magic is the way we respond. The rational science is how it's done. But how it's done is not the only thing that's important. What impact does it have on us? And to be able to retain that wonder, that an ability, that it's like a mechashev. This engineer is like a mechashev, says the Tiferes Yisrael. Doesn't mean he did it with witchcraft. That would never have been part of the Beis HaMikdash if it was done with witchcraft. But when you look at it, it's just so awe-inspiring that this can be done, that it was called Beis HaParva in the name of the architect that designed it.